Mark Carney speaks and our editorial plans change. We'll tell you what the PM's been announcing on Friday. We're going to talk law and order issues on both sides of the border. Some really interesting stuff. Police chief in the GTA steps in it a bit. And then the Heritage Foundation and Project 2025, why you should or should not invite them to your fancy liberal party. It's the Line Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Universities Canada. Canada has promised millions of new homes, shorter waits in health, and stronger defense. But promises don't design and engineer roads, staff clinics, or secure networks. People do. That's why we need a clear, coordinated system to attract and retain the world's best talent while creating more opportunities for Canadians. The best and brightest should always see Canadian universities as their first choice. It's time to put talent at the center of Canada's priorities. The path forward starts with training people, and Canada's world-class universities are ready to lead the way. To learn more, visit univcan.ca.
So, Matt, you have been fairly disappointed to date at the pace of announcements, the pace of change that was sort of implicitly promised by a Mark Carney government. You've been warned. I've been hearing it. Just wait, just wait, just wait. There's lots of stuff coming. We're coming in like a wrecking ball, first week back into September. I think you've been skeptical about this. I've been a little bit more, I don't know, man. Summer in Canada takes people time to get their feet from under them.
Jen's flipping burgers on the grill going, it'll be fine.
It'll be fine. Just give it till September, man. Like the kids aren't back in school yet. Just chill. And kind of on cue, what do we get? First week back at school, we've got the first slew of announcements. Matt, do you want to get into them? What is our fearless leader announcing for us?
Well, first of all, let me tell you something that made me laugh earlier this week, and I consider it as a data point in my favor, but then I'll tell you in a minute about what's been announced today. So a few days ago, I couldn't help but laugh at this. It was a sad laugh, but it was a laugh. The government is announcing a 100-day plan to fix the Canada Revenue Agency. The CRA has been identified as a major problem for the government on the customer service front. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have. I have had to deal with the CRA. It's a nightmare. Like, it's just a completely dysfunctional morass. So the government has said it's rolling out a 100-day plan to fix the CRA. And that made me laugh for two reasons. First of all, was that it took us 4 months to announce a 100-day plan. Not loving that. The other thing is I actually looked at the 100-day plan, and there's not a lot of details. But when I looked at what actually was Minister Champagne, the finance minister, when he was actually getting into the details of what might be done in the 100 days, look, I've been wrong before, but I think these are things we might be able to do after 100 days. It doesn't strike me as stuff will be finished in 100 days. So I'll move on, but I have set a calendar reminder for 100 days after that was announced. It's going to pop up on my phone, and I'm going to update Jen and all of you, the listeners and viewers of the Line Podcast, as to whether or not we have fixed the Canada Revenue Agency.
We will also put some journalistic effort into there. We will call the CRA with a fake problem and see whether or not we can A, get through, and B, whether or not they seem happier. So there you go.
And that was Tuesday or Wednesday this week after Labor Day. And then coming up to Friday, there's the big, apparently we're not supposed to call them retreats anymore. So there's a cabinet event that's going to be happening. And today, Mark Carney made a bunch of announcements. Forgive me, viewers in particular, I'm going to read these. I've just grabbed this right off the CBC's reporting on this, which is unfolding live. Initiatives announced today. A quote, reskilling package. It's going to be changes to the employment insurance system that make them more flexible. There will also be a digital jobs training program launched to help workers retool into the jobs of tomorrow. Based on the rate of AI development, the jobs of tomorrow might actually be obsolete the day after tomorrow, but whatever. Okay, that's what they've announced. A $5 billion new fund called the Strategic Response Fund that will help tariff-affected industries adapt. Okay, we'll see what that does. A new Buy Canada policy. The federal government will be using more Canadian suppliers and will apparently, and this is vague, but will apparently also be working with the provinces and municipalities to do the same. There will be changes at the Business Development Bank of Canada to expand eligibility to businesses and also to increase the amounts they can borrow to support growth. This is going to cost an estimated $1 billion over the next 3 years. A lot of news on the agriculture front, new biofuels production in Canada, and a lot of help for canola, which actually that's been, Jen, as you know, that's actually not Trump related. That's China related.
Yeah, and that's also been a very long-standing beef among canola farmers who have been highly annoyed that Canada has been picking trade fights with China to the disproportionate disbenefit of canola farmers. This is a long-standing issue in the West here.
So there's a lot of money apparently heading to them to help them out. This is the one I find the most interesting. It's probably not the most consequential, but it's the one that amused me the most. The upcoming zero emissions vehicle standard is going to be delayed pending review. And Jen and I had a laugh about this before we hit the record button today, because this is classic politics. And this is a bit of a deep cut, Jen, but it reminded me of how Canada spent years and years and years not making a Huawei decision on whether or not we'd allow Huawei to put like advanced telecommunications technology into our networks. And then it eventually kind of became clear that not making the decision was the decision.
Well, but here's the funny thing about the EV mandate is that even when the EV mandate stuff was first announced, it was widely panned as being like physically and logistically impossible. So we absolutely all knew that there was no, like eventually the Liberals were going to have to walk this back one way or another. So when I read review here, what I just read that as Canadianese for, yes, we're canceling the EV mandate, but we're not going to come right out and say it because then I'll have to deal with Guilbeault and cabinet. And I just don't want to deal with that drama.
Yes.
But everybody's going to hear EV review and be like, oh, we're doing the inevitable thing that we knew we were always going to do.
Look, I've been accused once or twice of being too hard on Mark Carney, but I just couldn't help but laugh. Mark Carney in general has been a big tonal shift from Justin Trudeau, and I acknowledge that. This is extremely Trudeau.
Except it's tonally Trudeau.
It is, but it's also tactically Trudeau.
But it's tactically Trudeau. But it is also the inevitable and correct decision. So I'm okay. I'm willing to give it a pass.
This is we keep mentioning the former guy's name. This is also cleanup aisle Trudeau. Like this was something typical of the former prime minister. We're going to make an announcement that sounds good. We're going to derive the political value of having made the announcement. We're going to tweet about it a bunch. We're going to show up at events and talk about how we've made this pledge. We have no plan to enact it because it's impractical. And now it comes down to Carney. Reality looms, right? Like we're nowhere close to being able to do this. And Carney, instead of going, no, this is bullshit. It was always bullshit. We're canceling it. He pauses it for review.
No, so it's even better yet. Like there was the announcement of a mandate that we all knew was never going to come into effect, and now there was a review of the announcement of the mandate that we all knew was never going to come into effect, and it's probably no longer going to come into effect.
And during the time where we conclude if the impossible thing will be attempted, we will pause our attempts to do the impossible thing.
There you go. It's perfection. It wraps everything up in a beautiful liberal bow. It's almost perfect.
This is a heritage moment in the making.
Exactly. Look, so there's a couple things I would say about the announcement. One thing, I'm glad that there's a slew of announcements coming. I think that continues to signal the correct tonal movements. This is not the first time I've heard the Liberal talk about things like retraining programs. It's almost impossible for me to assess the previous effectiveness of retraining programs because there's never any hard metrics or objective metrics that are ever announced in a long time. So, were previous training programs a total waste of money, or did they actually, move the needle on anything? Impossible for us to actually assess this. It strikes me as things like programs like the $5 billion put aside program to sort of rapidly address industries affected by tariffs and trade war issues. That strikes me as a good idea in principle, but also could potentially be a massive boondoggle in the making. Buy Canada, again, maybe a necessary move in principle. I worry that it's going to have inflationary effects, which is maybe just something we have to deal with. Biofuels, come on, guys. Biofuels. I mean, people have been talking about biofuels for a very long time. They have a role to play as like additives for fuels. We understand that a lot of people in green and sustainability sectors really like the idea of them because they like the idea that we're going to be building these clean fuels out of crop and waste. Generally speaking, these things have proved to be biofuel programs have proven to be not totally, but a bit of a waste because the amount of energy that has to go into actually growing the crops that you're then going to convert into biofuels means that it's sustainably a bit of a wash. You're better off just
into a bit of a self-licking ice cream cone.
Exactly. It's a self-licking ice cream. Like, look, it doesn't, it can be used to replace, greenhouse gas emitting fuels that you pull out from the ground, like dead dinosaurs. It can be used to replace and supplement that. But generally speaking, you're better off in the long run just putting that energy into growing crops, essentially. Like grow food crops. That's actually the better place to be putting that stuff. So biofuels, that has I think that's got boondoggle potential written on it, but fine. So as I said, like I don't have. We've already talked about the EV mandate reviews. The canola stuff I think is going to be really crucial for a lot of Western Canadian farmers. On one hand, on the other hand, I think that a lot of Western Canadian farmers would say, "Great, thanks for the help, but I don't want you to create a system where I am more and more dependent on the federal government.
Yeah. I
want you to create a system where you, for the most part, have created an equal playing field with our trading partners." And your weirdnesses, and I think that what's happened with China, if I recall correctly from my memory, is that there's like a kit like they've put tariffs on our canola and I think also our lentils, but I'll double check that as a retaliation for tariffs that they put on their EVs.
It was the EVs.
The EVs. Why are we putting, if we're trying to encourage more EVs, why are we putting tariffs on Chinese EVs? Like, I mean, I'm sure that this was probably some kind of...
I'll tell you exactly why. The White House wanted us to.
Yeah, exactly. Well, okay, great. So now we've fucked over the Western Canadian... Anyway, everything is an interconnected web. So, yeah, I don't necessarily think this is going to ease the consciousness of and goodwill of a lot of Canadian canola farmers who are like, so wait a minute, you're willing to go to war for America over supply managed trade and dairy, but you're willing to completely bork us on Chinese EVs. Like, wait, this is not equal treatment, although I'm sure
talk about Western alienation. Look, here I am in the heart of Toronto, and it's like we're going to dump billions of dollars into the auto sector in Ontario and simultaneously destroy Western agricultural operations so that we can further protect the automotive industry in Southern Ontario. That's
right. What industries are getting protected? What industries are we being elbows up about? And what industries do we seem perfectly happy to sacrifice? There's a pattern.
Yeah, you know what there is? I'm not, what I'm going to say to you, Jen, is not for a moment to refute that, because I agree with you, there's a pattern. But you said elbows up. I'm looking around the room right now. I'm not seeing a lot of elbows.
No, that's true. Like, please wait. There are certain things that we seem to be willing to actually go to the wall to defend again in our fight against Trump. Again, supply managed dairy is the longstanding beef here in the West. And then there are certain industries where we're just like, well, how big is the canola industry anyway? It's huge. It's absolutely enormous.
We'll offer them money.
It's a huge amount of cash.
Yep.
So, I am not without my critiques of some of these announcements. It's nice to see some of these announcements come down the pipe.
Yeah. And what I would say is I'm not going to say we're good cop, bad cop here, but as the skeptic among us, okay, we've got announcements. Let's see what they do.
Yeah, let's see what they do.
Let's see if they work. And to your point before, it would be nice to actually see some stuff get programmed in to monitor. I will tell you, and I'm not saying there's going to be any disagreement between you and I on this, but I want to go a bit further on one of the points you made. I'm not sure exactly which minister is going to be responsible for the $5 billion retooling and adaptation program. I suspect it's going to be under Jolie. Could be wrong. We'll see how that gets structured. All I'm saying is there is a possibility that Melanie Joly has just been handed a $5 billion fund to be used essentially at her own discretion. What I'm going to ask everybody is how they feel about that. Does that sound like a good idea?
Whatever happened to the Green Slush Fund? Do we all remember the Green Slush Fund? Was that ever resolved? Did we ever figure out which of the Liberal buddies got that, those handouts from those multi-billion-dollar sustainability funds? Remember that was a thing that would cause a whole
that was a thing until the social media campaign.
I don't know.
That was a thing as long as the conservative social media managers wanted to be a thing, and then they stopped, and it just
and then
wasn't.
They stopped giving a shit, which was a shame because I actually think that still is a real story. But anyway,
that's actually an interesting point. It should be. But if the only way something gets attention is if one of the opposition parties is constantly tweeting about it, stop trying to make fetch happen.
This is actually probably a condemnation of us on the journalism side. We've kind of dropped the ball on that particular one. So maybe we should pick it up again.
We just don't care about the things we should.
Yeah, well, there you go. And also, I increasingly think a lot of the people in the public don't really care about terrible spending decisions and misappropriated spending. I think I don't know if people actually give a shit about this. I really don't.
They do. They don't until they do, and it's weird when they do. And you can never predict in advance. The classic example, Jen, is the Bevoda orange juice.
$16 orange juice. It's like you gave a shit. You could say we're not actually going to pay very much attention to your supercluster effectiveness or your retraining program or your $5 billion tariff slush fund or your green slush fund. But God help you if you spend too much at a hotel orange juice. It's very weird. Anyway, that's all I really have to say about the announcements. Do you have anything that you want to add about this? Any embarrassing rockbacks?
I just wanted to ask you a question. So you and I have been talking, I think, for 3 weeks now about me being more in a hurry, ready to go. Come on, Carney, let's go get him. Where are you feeling on that? Has there been any drift in 3 weeks? Like, are you kind of starting to wonder where is it, or are you still serene in your expectation that it's coming?
I think it's probably useful to have us on a mildly disagreeable wavelength on some of this stuff. Just so that we can be devil's advocates against one another.
Yeah.
But I don't actually think we're that far apart. I don't think that the Liberals have the benefit of the doubt. I do think it's hilarious that a lot of what Carney's doing is essentially quietly or explicitly walking back Trudeau's legacy. I think it's deeply hilarious and indicative of just the overall patheticness and weakness of the Liberal caucus, that they're just like, new guy, old guy, who dis? They're just kind of rolling along with it without much pushback, which is about what I would expect given what we saw in the dying days of the Trudeau era. That's on point. So I don't disagree with you on that. However, I just think it's not unreasonable for someone like Carney coming from outside of government, trying to engage serious reforms, to have taken a couple of months to figure out how things work and where the problems are. I don't think that's unreasonable. This list of announcements is remarkably more grounded than I think any list of announcements I ever saw coming from the Trudeau side. That's good. Do I still think that we have a lot of the same structural problems that will impair implementation? Yes. I don't think that those have necessarily been fixed. So we'll see what happens. But I'm glad to see that there was a list of announcements ready to go as essentially the new school year began, because that's in Canada how things work here. And let's see where we are in 100 days from now. I think the 100-day clock does start for me now. I think that would be my case on this.
Well, I don't remember the exact date because I did set the clock when the CRA announcement is made. Yeah. So it's going to go off sometime in December.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact date, but I do remember, and this just tells you how my brain has been warped by this job. I looked at it. I was like, oh, good. We'll still be podcasting. We won't be at Christmas yet. One of the things I would say, and it's weird, I'm going to actually defend Trudeau for a while. You said this package of initiatives seems more grounded. I'm going to bet during COVID or if Trump won, I'm going to bet if we went through the news archives, we would find statements from the government very similar to what was announced today.
Especially on the retraining stuff. The retraining stuff sounds
and
very,
agricultural supports, vehicles. I think one of the problems the Trudeau people had was that they would sometimes announce sensible policy. And then, well, first of all, there's the deliverology problem. Whether or not they would actually ever get around to doing it was an issue. But then they would also go out and announce something much bigger and splashier that would play better at some global event the prime minister was scheduled to give a speech at, and no one would notice what they were saying about the retraining program because he'd show up somewhere with funky socks.
Yeah, well,
they got in their own way a lot.
Yeah, but there was also a lot of like, let's announce a giant supercluster that's billions of dollars into AI compute. You know what I mean? Like, there was a lot of that utopian bullshit too. I mean, all of this stuff here, I mean, I can be slightly skeptical about, will Buy Canada have inflationary effects, or, will Jolie actually manage this $5 billion tariff fund appropriately? But I feel like we're back into the realm of normal political punditry again. Does that make sense? Like, I feel like I feel like I'm back into a place of consensus reality where we're having sensible conversations about policy disputes and about delivering on promises, as opposed to like, why in the holy shit is Justin Trudeau making a point of trash talking the fact that the Americans elected Donald Trump instead of Kamala Harris at like a feminist politics event? I feel like when we're criticizing these or applying skepticism to some of these announcements, I'm no longer in a crazy person's land anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think okay. Yes, I'm more skeptical than you are, but I know what you're saying. So
yeah.
I don't know if you watch it because it was in the summer and you were on vacation, but one of my on the lines over the summer was with Andrew McDougall. We were talking about social media, and I asked him because he was Stephen Harper's comms director when Twitter was new, and I kind of talked to him about what's that?
That cuck.
Yeah, we have a bone to pick with him. Thanks.
Yeah, totally.
But I asked him, when you were in political communications and these things were new, what was the process like of learning how to use them? And he actually gave like a really good answer, talking about how first we kind of viewed it as a press release. So we would tweet the prime minister's itinerary. Today, the prime minister will give remarks at this time, at this place on this topic. He goes, eventually we started to figure out, you'd have the prime minister with a kitten or telling a joke and you do a little video. They started to figure out what worked as an engagement tool. And one of the things I said to him, and he didn't disagree, was that the Liberals studied what the Harper government was figuring out on social media. I think they also looked at what Obama was figuring out south of the border on social media, and they took it to the next level. And I think what we saw with Trudeau was at first an effective weaponization of new social media tools for political purposes. But then I also think Trudeau et al. Then probably hit the outer limit of its utility and kept right on going to the point where it was counterproductive.
Yeah.
But I also think, and you and I have talked about this a lot, Poilievre, as conservative leader, has been focused, not exclusively, but a lot, on winning online battles. So I think we're coming out of a period where our government and our opposition were fighting online.
Are
we seeing it revert?
Yeah, and they weren't fighting in Parliament. They're fighting on Twitter. Online. So that was really productive.
And Parliament was actually, sorry, Jen, but I'll let you finish. But I'm going to let you finish. Parliament was then suborned to generating clips for Twitter.
For Twitter, yeah, absolutely. So that is crazy. And I do feel like the vibe now feels a lot more like it was sort of 2017, 2018.
Maybe. Yeah,
right?
Maybe.
Like that's what it feels like. This feels like maybe the adults are a little bit back in the room and I can have policy disagreements with the adults, but I'm not tearing my hair out. That's nice.
Too late for me. It's all gone.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, I don't know if I have anything else to add to that particular position. To be honest with you, I do think we want to talk a little bit more about crime and order, and it does seem like...
Including a Carney announcement. Yeah.
Including a Carney announcement. I do think Carney is once again coming around on... Oh yeah, here's what I wanted to say. Sorry. The Conservatives announced something today that was topical and relevant, and I'm a political pundit, and I can't remember for the life of me what it is they announced this week.
Well...
Was it a crime and order thing?
I was going to say, this is an accidental segue, but... Pierre Poilievre a few days ago was announcing Similar to what Ian Runkle and I were talking about, sort of like a reverse onus on home defense scenarios where the Crown has to establish before proceeding with charges that the charges are warranted. And I know that's not wildly different than the status quo, and I want to keep the lawyers out of our comments nitpicking us. But like anything that clarifies sort of an extraordinary, so you know what? Why don't we put a pin in it? We'll come back. We'll talk about it in the Law and Order segment.
We'll get back because I didn't mind that particular idea. But anyway, we'll get into it. Lots of people freaked out over it because any kind of reform to self-defense policy, and all of a sudden you have the castle law, and you're going to legalize gunning down poor kids wearing, hoodies in the street. And of course, that's completely insane. But we're going to get into it because there's been a lot of news on the crime order punishment home defense file. And it's worth digging into in our next segment. So to that end, stay with us, like and subscribe. Check us out at www.readtheline. This is The Line Podcast with your hosts, Matt Gurney and Jen Gerson.
For hundreds of communities across Canada, forestry is a lifeline, supporting 200,000 workers, $87 billion in annual revenues, and $37 billion in exports, $29 billion to the United States. But it's more than just a driver of our economy. It's key to addressing some of our biggest challenges. We need an action plan for our forest sector and its employees, one that will help build the homes we need with Canadian wood, reduce the risk of wildfires, and create more family-supporting jobs right here at home. To learn more about what forestry can do for Canada, visit forestryforthefuture.ca.
Premier can make his own statement and his own mind up about that. What I would say is, as a police service, we'll follow the laws as they're written. If the laws change, we'll change with the laws. But as it stands, we know the best defense for most people is to comply. As you've just heard, a number of safety recommendations will allow for those that are victimizing members in the community to leave and not harm anyone. It sometimes can fall on deaf ears when members feel like they have to take matters into their own hands. And the only thing I'd say is, if we are going to rely on our community members to take matters into their own hands to solve this problem, we have all failed our community. I've been down at Queen's Park. I've provided comments on bail reform. So have many of my colleagues across the GTA. And here we are again talking about it. And it seems like in some cases, right, we have not moved the needle collectively, because this is not just a police issue. Unfortunately, when it becomes our issue, it's too late. So we need to do something about this issue around bail and about keeping those people off the streets that shouldn't be on the streets.
So, Matt, we just jumped right into our second segment with a quote here. Can you provide some context? Who is that speaking?
That was Jim McSweeney. He is, I keep trying to say McSweeney. Sorry, I think it's like my brain is combining him and Sydney Sweeney. Totally different people. Jim McSweeney is the chief of police for York Region. It is about more than 1 million people now. I grew up there. It's mind-blowing, but it's the administrative district right on top of Toronto. So there's the 416, the city of Toronto. The northern border of Toronto is Steeles Avenue. York Region's on the other side. York Region is a municipality that encompasses Richmond Hill, Markham, Vaughan, Newmarket, some very large growing communities in the greater Toronto area. Like I said, there's more than 1 million people there now. It is a big, big neighborhood. It has an amalgamated police force. And those were the words of the chief of that police force at a press conference in the GTA just a few days ago.
And also, let's provide a little bit more context, because, of course, this is coming right on the heels of the incident in Lindsay, Ontario, where an individual, a homeowner, was arrested for using force against a home invader whom I believe we now understand was carrying a crossbow. Yeah. So, look, we talked a lot about the home defense file in a really broad way last week. So if you want to get into that, I know that quote's going to enrage a lot of people, because I think it's enraged Matt. Probably enraged Matt a little bit more than me, but not a lot. But I wanted to step away from the emotion of that that is elicited by that quote. And I want to subject that quote to kind of what I call a 4-pillar analysis. I know that's what you're here for on the line. Not
that's
the 4-pillar.
scintillating. Yeah. Before you do, Jen, can I just catch people up on the news out of the GTA?
No, I think you should catch it because you're in the GTA. I'm in Alberta.
So I just want to mention.
I'm in Alberta where no police officer would dare say something like that.
Oh my God. You guys should separate. I'm going to come and live there. No, I don't mean that. But so you have correctly contextualized this by noting this follows on the aftermath of what happened in Lindsay, Ontario last month. We've had a couple of very upsetting stories in Southern Ontario just in the last couple of days. I hate talking about this stuff, so forgive me, folks. This isn't fun to talk about. But a bit north of Niagara Falls, so a little bit outside the GTA, but still well within Southern Ontario, a man has been arrested for breaking into a home and sexually assaulting a child under the age of 5. We don't have any more details for obvious reasons. The police don't release victim identity. But what we know from news reporting was that the child was below the age of 5 and during the course of the assault was severely injured. I think listeners and viewers can infer what they need from that. The child was injured during the assault so severely they had to be transported to another jurisdiction for advanced medical care. The other incident that happened, and this was in the GTA, and this was specifically in York Region, so Chief McSween's jurisdiction. So there was a home invasion. We're not totally clear yet on all the details, so I don't want to overstate what is publicly known. There's a lot of rumors, and I don't want to get the two confused. But the long and the short of it was that a man was executed with a shot to the head in front of his wife and young children. The family has said that the wife and kids saw the execution. So I'm sure there are others that I'm not thinking of right now.
So the first thing is I think we should put some of that into context. Home invasion and violent death of that nature is still very rare in Canada. Okay? These things don't actually happen from a statistical point of view very often here in Canada. I mean, that being said, they happen often. You personally listening to this podcast are very, very unlikely to experience anything of this nature. This is on the extreme end. Canada is still a very safe country relative to other countries, particularly America. I think there is a perception that these types of crime cases are on the rise. I don't know how grounded that perception is in reality because we don't have the same kind of access to data that they do in the United States, unfortunately. What is very different here is the culture and law surrounding self-defense. Again, we talked about this in considerable length last week, where we talked about, we don't have a castle law, which, by the way, doesn't even come from America. It's a norm, I believe. It actually has its origins in the UK. We don't have clear and explicit allowances for homeowners to use lethal force if their home is being defended. What we have is case law and a general mushy understanding that you are allowed to use quote unquote reasonable force to defend yourself and your property. What reasonable force actually means in practice is usually you may have the right to shoot a home invader and that shot may kill them, but you don't have the right to intentionally kill the home invader. And in practice, what that means is a not infrequent, but still rare set of examples that once a year, once every couple of years, you get a homeowner arrested for defending their property using lethal or near lethal force. And there's a very predictable amount of outrage about this and calls to sort of clarify or change the laws around this. So that is like the broad picture analysis. And then into this sort of political and legal morass, you got Chief McSween stepping in, essentially saying compliance is your best measure. If hopefully they don't, shoot your husband in front of you. And again, this is where I want to take the emotion out of it a little bit and subject his actual statement, which we've played in full so that people can get the context, to a bit of what I call my 4-pillar analysis. One is what he's saying technically correct? Secondly, get into communication theory for a little bit, because one of the big problems of communication is that what people say and what people hear are often different things. So I want to ask, what is the criminal class going to hear from that statement? Then I want to ask, what are the homeowners going to hear from that statement? And lastly, I want to ask, is that statement morally defensible on its face? And Matt, I think that you and I are going to have an interesting discussion here. It's worthwhile. One is what the chief advising technically correct? And I would actually probably argue, and you may disagree with me, is that in some cases, yes. Use your judgment. There's no grabbing a gun and trying to shoot a home invader doesn't guarantee you success. And it might, in fact, raise the risk that the home invader will use lethal force against you and your family. There's no guarantees here. So, I think that the way that I would like that statement to have been phrased differently. I would like that statement to be focusing on using good judgment and practical good sense. I would like a statement to point out that, yes, sometimes in some circumstances, compliance is the correct answer. And compliance might be the answer that will reduce the risks for you and your family. Sometimes that's the case. The problem, of course, is that it's never, you never know whether or not compliance or fighting is the right answer in the moment. You never actually know until after the incident is done what the outcomes of your choices were. But sometimes I do think compliance and cooperation are correct. I do think, for example, it's correct to fire a warning shot before you shoot at someone. I think it's correct to warn them to leave the property before you escalate. Technically what he's saying may not be totally wrong. I don't love the way that he phrased it. I think there was a better way to phrase that to get the idea across. But it's not always right to go for your gun and start shooting when someone breaks into your home. Sometimes that is the wrong answer. And I will say that as someone, we talked about this last week. I have been home while someone tried to break into my apartment, and I have been the victim of burglaries. So I have been the victim of crimes here. And, in my case, neither of these cases escalated to a violent incident. In my case, when somebody tried to break into my home, realized I was home, they ran off. I think that's actually the more common outcome for most cases. So, I don't think people should necessarily be run into the gun store, guns ablazing, the very second there's a sign of trouble. I do think that you need to maintain common sense, good judgment, and a level head. Okay? So there's one pillar. Second pillar, and this is where things get a little trickier. Because
do you want me to respond pillar by pillar, or do you want to lay them all out?
No, I don't want to ramble. So please respond to that.
I do broadly think you're okay, but I do think I think you've correctly said that the context matters. And I think one of the problems the chief is getting into here is that we have long been told by law enforcement that your possessions aren't worth your life. And I think in general, that's true. So let me lay out some different scenarios here. One, I'm walking down the street. Guy comes up to me out of a dark alley, points a gun at me and says, "Give me your wallet." I'm going to give him my wallet.
Yeah.
I'm at an intersection, stopped at a red light. Guy comes, taps on my window. He's got a gun pointed at me. He says, "Get out of the car. Leave the keys. Get out of the car." I'm going to get out of the car. I'm going to let him drive off with my car. I think those are the scenarios in which not resisting, not being a hero is almost universally the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I don't think that logic applies when someone's breaking into your house.
Okay, so here's where I would agree with you, and here's where I think that this logic starts to get turned on its head. Because you're right, your possessions aren't worth your life, but your possessions also aren't worth having your life risked over. And by that I mean the onus goes both ways. If your possessions aren't worth your life, then guess what? Your possessions shouldn't be worth risking someone else's life to steal. Right? And when you phrase it like that, now the onus is put on the perpetrator and not the victim. Mm-hmm. The second thing that I would also point out is the second someone's willing to break into your house and not run away when they realize there's someone in your house is a second that someone is communicating to you in no uncertain terms that they're willing to use violence against you in order to take your possessions.
While we were talking about this before we started recording, you said something that's very elegant, and I'm going to repeat it, but it's Jen's words, not mine. Home invasions are inherently violent.
Yes.
They are themselves an act of violence. Even if you in your person are never touched, they need not lay a finger upon you. A home invasion is a violent act.
Yes, because the second someone is willing to come into your home, see that you're home, and then continue their plan to steal from you, they are signaling that they are willing to use violence against you and potentially lethal violence against you and your family by virtue of the fact that they haven't walked away. Like I think most home invasions don't go that way, realistically. I think most home invasions are basically burglaries gone wrong. So most home invasions happen.
Someone's here, back out the window. Yeah.
Yes, that was my experience, right? And I think that that's way more common. But the second that you're dealing with a person who's willing to say, okay, there's a person here and I'm willing to escalate further, you're now dealing with someone whose willingness to use violence ranges anywhere from hypothetical to absolute. And there's no way for you as the victim to know where your criminal is on that spectrum. So you kind of have to operate under the assumption that you're dealing with someone who's willing to use lethal violence against you for your TV. So what do we do with that? Or
Jen, I think you have to assume that you're in a case where a guy points a gun at me and demands my wallet. I have pretty good reason to believe the wallet is the target.
Yes,
someone
right.
Smacks on my window when I'm parked at stopped at a red light and says, "Get out of the car." I have pretty good reason to believe the car is the target. When someone's coming into a home that they should know is occupied, I think I'm the target.
Yeah, well, and also there's no way for you to be sure of what the target might be your keys.
And I don't owe them the benefit of the doubt.
TV. The target might be, the sexual gratification against your children. The target might just be that the person wants to kill someone. So, there's no way for you to know that. Now, that being said,
and I don't owe them any benefit of the doubt in that scenario.
Once somebody's broken into your house, I don't think you owe them the benefit of the doubt. I think you owe them a warning, and that's it. But that being said, okay, so I think that what the police is saying, I think I understand what he's trying to communicate. I don't think he communicated it effectively. And I don't think that what he's even saying is necessarily technically correct in all cases. I think I can think of many scenarios where it makes much, much more sense to be a hero than it does to be like, well, someone's putting a gun at my head. I might as well just put my hands out and let the guy tie my arms, and then I have no choices. Right? I think that your judgment and good sense have to take paramount decision-making authority in that moment over a cop's advice.
The cop is right if he's talking to a bank teller in the middle of a bank robbery or a convenience store clerk in the middle of a robbery or a stick-up. It's correct advice for a mugging or a carjacking. I think it's the completely wrong advice for a home invasion, unless... if I'm home alone and my back door is right there and 6 guys are coming through my front door, yeah, okay. The smart thing to do in my calculation at the time might be, you know what? I've got my watch on. I'm heading out the back door and hitting 911 on that thing and calling for help as I hop the fence into my neighbor's yard. But if my kids are in the house, I'm going to stand and fight.
Well, yeah, I said judgment and common sense need to take priority here, is in as much as it's possible in a high fear scenario. Okay. Now, he may have statistics that back his assessment up. I can't assess those statistics. I just think that what the communication that I would like to have seen from him is more like, please stay grounded. Don't panic. Keep your heads cool. Try to call the police first and foremost. Usually speaking, yes, it probably does make sense if you can leave your property before you fight. Sometimes that's an option. Sometimes that's not an option. If you can, barricade your door before you fight. Sometimes that's an option. Sometimes that's not an option. And I think that the school shootings in the United States, ironically, actually give us a pretty good model. And I think that it was what was their advice? It was something like, if you can run, run. If you can't run, hide. If you can't hide, fight. I think that's actually a really, really good model for most people most of the time in these kinds of scenarios. But straight up just comply is probably not the right answer in that scenario most of the time.
Yeah, I think as well, responsibility for others is the missing ingredient, because the advice I would give my kids if they were in a school shooting would be verbatim that. Run if you can. If you can't hide. If you can't hide, fight. It's verbatim correct advice that I would give my 12-year-old. But it's not the advice I'd give a teacher.
Well, that's right. And I think that
when you're responsible for the safety of others. And
also, this is, I think, part of why this becomes such an emotional conversation, particularly for men who take the responsibility and care of their wives and children very much to heart, right? Like it's not, if it's a guy trying to shoot you alone in your house, that is a very different emotional scenario for you than there's a guy trying to break into the house to hurt me or my kids or my wife. I think that's human nature. And we just have to build that understanding of human nature into our understanding and our communication model here. So that brings me back to my communication model. This is what the guy said. What are people actually hearing when the guy says this? Because if I'm a criminal in the criminal class, you know what I'm hearing? Open
buffet
fucking
is wide
season.
open, all you can eat.
Buffet's open, all you can eat.
Yep.
Police are telling these little sheepy here not to fight back and to comply. Fantastic. They'll do what they're told. Great. That's what I'm hearing if I'm criminal class with that statement. And do you want to know what I'm hearing if I'm a law-abiding homeowner class?
It's what I wrote those 2 columns last year, maybe a year and a half ago. I'm hearing that the police have effectively surrendered.
Yep. The police are basically saying deterrence is no longer something that's feasible. You're on your own. Well, call the cops if you can, but surrender and die and hope for the best. And look, 20% of the population, we talked about the 80-20 problem, 20% of the population, almost all of them in nice areas in urban downtown Toronto and who operate on Twitter and Blue Sky, are going to take that as very reasonable, common sense advice. And 80% of the population of Canada who don't have their heads in their ass are going to say, fuck you, and they're going to buy guns. And Matt, I would be shocked if in 2 weeks we didn't come back and find that gun sales had gone up in southern Alberta or southern Ontario as a direct result of that police officer's press statement.
I can't prove it yet.
I would genuinely be shocked.
I can't prove it yet, but I've spoken about this with you on the podcast. This is something I've said in public before. I have strong anecdotal reasons to have concluded, not in a whimsical, hey, maybe, but I sincerely believe that firearm sales have risen considerably in Canada over the last 2 years.
Oh, no, we know that that's the case. And I'd be shocked if they don't go up over the next 2 weeks as a direct response of how people are going to interpret that particular statement from the chief.
The chief's message effectively boils down to, you're on your own, but don't act like it.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that what was really interesting about the final part of that press statement was where he said something to the effect of,
I've got it here.
If citizens have to take this feel like they have to take this into their own hands, we've failed.
This is a slightly truncated quote, but if we're going to rely on community members to take matters in their own hands, then we've all failed.
Yes, that's right. Chief, I hate to break it to you, but
you failed.
You failed. And also the fact that you've even held this press conference and said the things that you've said have communicated failure. So you're almost there, buddy. You almost got it.
It's one of those scenarios too, Jen, where people are going to want to nitpick us to death on Twitter or Reddit or whatever by like pointing to specific major crime indicator stats and the arrows up or down. But this is one of those things, and I don't often make this case because most of the time, as you know, you and I both have this in common. We're both rooted in facts, but there are matters where perception is reality.
That's right.
And when the public begins to conclude a thing, there are times when that is the issue at hand. So if you are arguing to a public that is increasingly arming itself because it has lost faith in the ability of the police and the court system, which is the other part of this equation, to maintain public safety, even if crime stats for the last 6 months show a 13% decline on selected indicators over the last fiscal year, it doesn't matter. Chief, you failed. Collectively, the police in this country have failed and the courts have failed. We were talking, Jen, about Carney's announcements today. Mark Carney announcing this morning. It wasn't part of the official suite of announcements, but at a news conference, he said he has just spoken with Premier Ford, that he agrees with what Premier Ford has been saying, and that the federal government will be announcing legislation in the coming weeks on the issue of bail reform. Okay? I'll welcome that. But this is a recognition that we have failed. And let's get more comfortable in this country saying that. Let's admit failure.
This brings me to the fourth pillar of my analytical pillars.
So let's go through this. What was the third pillar? The first pillar was there's technical truth. Second was open season buffet. Third was everybody go arm up now. And this is fourth.
Fourth is basically, so was the statement morally defensible on its face, even if it was technically true?
No.
And here's where I get into a deeper conversation, and that is sometimes advice can be correct for an individual in an individual circumstance, and yet at the same time, giving that advice to a collective in a collective context is an absolute horrific abrogation of your moral duties. And the reason why that is because part of the reason why crime in Canada is low is for a lot of different reasons. But one of them is that, deterrence is real. The power of deterrence is real. And deterrence is rooted on a couple of different assumptions. One, well, shit, I can break into this house, but how many minutes do I have before the police show up? Two, yes, I can break into this house and steal stuff or hurt people, but if I get caught, how likely am I to go to jail? And three, deterrence is built on the assumption of, yes, I can break into this house, but what are the odds they're armed and will shoot back?
Yeah.
And if 1 out of 10 houses is likely to be armed and will shoot back, then that has the effect of reducing the odds of the break-in among all 10 houses.
Collective deterrence.
That's a collective deterrence conversation. So what we're having right now is failure on 2.5 of these fronts. One, increasingly in many communities, there isn't faith of rapid police response. In some communities, urban communities, yes, but in many places, especially urban communities, we all know that's not the case. So there's your first pillar of deterrence falling apart. Second pillar of deterrence. Our bail reforms are bullshit. Everyone knows that violent criminals are being let out at an extraordinary rate. And we all know that most of the crime is caused by a minority of people. So we all know that shit's gotten out of control, particularly in urban centers.
Yeah.
And third, the deterrence of last resort, which it should be a deterrence of last resort, which is just individual homeowners being willing to fight back. You're fundamentally corroding and undermining that collective deterrence pillar with a statement that just says, just comply. And just to draw an analogy here, I would say, do you remember back, the 90s were a different time, man. Remember when they told us women that that a man tries to rape you, you do everything you can to fight back? You gouge his fucking eyes out. You.
I do remember that. I had the misfortune in a high school self-defense class of being the boy they chose to fight the female instructor, which was awkward.
Can you imagine a police officer coming today and saying, if a man just tries to rape you, your odds of getting hurt are statistically speaking lowest if you just lie back and take it? Because that's effectively what's being advised here. In some cases, I don't even think the analogy is poor, because in this case, sexual assault during home invasions is a pretty significant risk. No. Like if somebody's trying to rape you, they're already going to hurt you. You might as well fight back. And you might as well extract some kind of cost against them, even if it does increase your probability of being hurt more as an individual. And this isn't just an individual cost-benefit analysis here. Fighting back also serves a collective deterrence element as well. Because if your advice to the individual woman is, look, if a man just says he wants to rape you and pulls a knife on you, you might as well just decrease your probability of getting hurt and open your legs. Right? The problem with that is that may or may not be true.
Let him finish and get it over with and hope he leaves without hurting you.
Like, firstly, that may or may not be true. Or he may just beat the shit out of you for fun. You're already dealing with an individual who's demonstrated a willingness to use force and violence against you.
Yeah, or that you've seen his face and he doesn't need you talking. Or that you've seen his face and he's just going to kill you. Like, maybe it reduces your individual odds of getting hurt, or maybe it doesn't. You don't know. That's totally unknowable. But when you basically condition women to not fight back through your advice, what you're actively doing is you're diminishing the collective deterrence against violence against women, because you're saying essentially, well, there won't be a price for you. So this really just depends on the police's ability and competence to find you. Sure. Every 1% increase in a would-be perpetrator's confidence that he can get away with this will result in an increase in the number of crimes.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's going to be a direct one-to-one correlation, but
nobody knows that. It's not knowable.
Deterrence works, and the lack of deterrence also works in the opposite direction.
Yes. Now, I would also say that with the desire not to get people panicked, the vast majority of sexual assault isn't the stranger in the park
alley.
scenario.
Yeah.
The vast majority of sexual assault is perpetuated by family members, friends, people who are in your orbit, people you know who have an opportunity or use
Same with
drugs.
Usually you're killed by someone you know.
The vast majority of crime isn't Law and Order. The vast majority of crime isn't Hollywood. Okay, so I'm gonna grant that. Get the nitpickers off my back here. I'm gonna grant that off the case. But some crime is heinous. Some crime, I'm not saying the other crime isn't heinous. Some crime is that heinous. Some crime really is just stalker, prowler in the night, nasty sociopath breaking into your house level shit. So I'm saying I think there has to be room for judgment. I think there has to be room for discretion. And I think there has to be a high, how should I say this, preference for the rights of the victim over the rights of the perpetrator. And is that the balance that we're getting right here with these kinds of communications and statements? My argument is no. Is that overly reasonable and analytical?
No, it's not. You're correct. I really, really don't like these stories. And I don't want to get, it's funny, you said a minute ago, am I being overly reasonable? I'm going to get overly intellectual for a second. One of the things you know when you study history is the value of internal security. Societies that have a perception of security flourish.
Sure.
Because you have the confidence, the hope, the faith to open a business, to travel from town to town, to dare lock your door and leave your home unattended for a week or two. Societies that lose that sense of security go to dark places. They retrench. All of us, this is something I often tell my kids, and they look at me weird. This is top level parenting here, Jen. I remind my kids regularly that human beings are war monkeys. We are hardwired to behave in biological ways that keep us alive. And it takes a very high standard of living to overcome that biology. Like, you've got to have a lot of junk food and video games and Netflix to overcome millions of years of mammalian evolution. And in North America in particular, we've had that for hundreds of years. We've had more or less security. We've had prosperity. We've had these things.
To the extent that we've forgotten what we are.
Yeah. And you're correct that sexual assault, home invasion, murder is rare.
It's incredibly rare.
To the extent it occurs, it is often targeting people who are known to each other.
Absolutely.
But we are also dealing with two other realities. It is rare, but becoming more common. With the trend is going in the wrong way. And we also now live in a media environment where awareness of these things is elevated.
Yes.
And I think the Chief McSween gave advice that in some context is correct. But he's giving that advice in a media environment where, just again, in Ontario in recent weeks, we've had a home invasion where the home occupant is now facing charges, where a child under the age of 5 required emergency medical intervention after a sex assault, and where a father was executed in front of his family. This is just scratching the list. And you and I talked about this, and I also talked about this recently on the Line with Ian Runkle. You and I know for a fact that there are lower level violent crimes that are never being reported to the police. When a guy having some sort of emotional upset punched me in Toronto a couple of years ago and didn't do any damage, I never reported that. And I'm not saying this because I'm a victim. You know, I got out of the subway, I had a hot dog, and I carried on with the rest of my day. Toronto street meat for the win. But I am a victim in a technical sense of an unreported assault. How many others like there are out there? How many people have been insomniac, binging on the latest season of whatever, and at night and they hear someone jiggling the door and they turn on their lights and the person takes off. How many low-level crimes have happened that are just not getting reported, but they're being talked about among friends, family, on community Facebook groups? The chief is operating in a media environment that I think he seems oblivious to, and what he's doing is counterproductive. I am a believer in the police and courts and prisons. You and I have talked about this, Jen. It took us thousands of years to come up with a pretty good system. A civilian law enforcement agency operating independently, handling public safety and arrest that feeds into an independent court system with safeguards for civil liberties, and a correctional system that was punitive and isolated the criminal element, but also offered a redemptive path. It took us thousands of years of trial and error to figure that out. And we're barely 200 years into it, and we have somehow found a way to fuck up all three of those elements.
Well, look, the last thing that I would just say is, like, I don't want to sit here on this podcast and encourage people to go buy a gun or engage in vigilantism or go do community block watches, though, frankly, the latter thing is already happening. Because especially in wealthy areas, people have so lost faith in communities and community policing that they're already taking this into their own hands and engaging in private security details. So, like, well done. Well, speaking of failure, that's a failure, guys. You failed.
And that's the reversion to that pre-200 years ago meme. The wealthy had private armies.
Yes, that was the norm 200 years ago. That's what we're going back to. But I also don't want to encourage it at the same time. I don't want to encourage people to engage in vigilantism, because I'm very conscious of the fact that what we had prior to reliable community policing was worse than what we had after reliable community policing. Like, a world in which we have, my husband leading up the local block watch, engaging in patrols around my community, armed. A reality in which almost every house is now armed and twitchy and willing to pull out the gun if they hear a bang at the door. That is not a safer community for any of us. That is a less safe society. That is a society in which social cohesion and social trust starts to decline. And that's a society in which you are going to get a lot more accidents, firearms accidents, and probably way more firearms accidents than actual criminal justified criminal events. That is a worse outcome for everyone. But that is also why you have to take perception of crime seriously. And that's why you have to be careful in the way you're communicating your advice to your citizenry, because that is the outcome we're now heading toward. So well done, everyone. Yeah.
Jen, you said a minute ago you don't want to encourage that. I don't want the chief to keep encouraging it either, but without intending to, he is.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. He is. Like, nobody's just going to lie. Like, 80% of the population is just not going to lie back and take it. That's not reality. That's not human nature. There's a reason why we have institutions, and it is as a bulwark against the worst of our nature. So please stop fucking up the institutions.
And a lot of,
unfortunately, the opportunity to be reminded about what we really are.
Many places in the world today, it is still very normal for even moderate middle-class houses to have very high walls, locked gates, spiky things, or barbed wire. Mm-hmm. Very common, even again in advanced affluent countries, mainly the United States, but there are others, to have some form of gated community. Historically speaking, we had city walls, night watchmen, tribal militias, the wealthy having their own private security forces. We had the king sending the army into particularly tough neighborhoods to slaughter everyone. We've had religious courts. We've had criminal organizations becoming de facto law enforcement. I spoke years ago to an old friend. He's passed away now, but he was Italian. He told me, back in the old country, we would call the police if someone stole our car, but if someone was touching the kids, we called the other guys and that guy went away. This is what human history is. Can we please actually improve on it for a change?
No, we cannot. And on that note, like and subscribe. Check us out online. Look, we have one final segment. I know that one went on. You and I do tend to go on this particular issue because, we're kind of passionate about it. But we do want to talk about Project 2025. We do want to get back into Carney land. There was a bit of an outrage this week that Carney invited a problematic guest to speak to cabinet. And both of us hated it. So let's come back after the like and subscribe, www.readtheline.ca.
You know, I get in trouble sometimes for having an open mind, and I'm pretty actually set in my own ways, but I'm okay hearing from people who disagree with me. One of the things, it's funny, Jen, I'll say to people sometimes, I think you're wrong, but that's fine. And they view that as passive aggressive. And I actually mean it generously. You don't have to agree with me about anything. I am comfortable talking to people who don't agree with you. I think you're a loser or nuts or a dork, but I'll listen to you. Is that rare? Are Canadians particularly bad at hearing from people they disagree with?
No, but I will tell you that there are some Canadians who think that the idea that you would talk to crazy people or problematic people is a sin against man and God. And those people, I think, are thankfully very much increasingly in the minority and increasingly also don't seem to realize that it's not 2020 anymore. So the reason why we're bringing this up.
Kevin Roberts. Kevin Roberts. American.
American?
Yeah. He's an American. He's I am trying to remember the guys. Is it Project 20? It's Project 2025.
Yeah,
the Heritage Foundation, or both, and I forget how they relate to each other. I'll simplify this. Kevin Roberts he's a baddie. He is someone who is identified as an intellectual force within the new American right-wing movement.
Right.
How's that?
I think that's right. And I think I would go further to that, and that I would say, Project 2025 in particular has explicitly and openly authoritarian aims. They seek to overtly centralize more and more power in the hands of the president. Their explicit open goals are to diminish the roles of checks and balance and diminish the roles of democratically elected people within Congress and other types of elements of the American population. And I think that there are definitely elements of Project 2025 that I would not hesitate to call sort of Christian nationalist. So they do have, if not a full-on Gilead version of America in their heads, they are operating in an environment in which they believe Christianity is massively under threat, and they do want to establish Christianity as a kind of state religion. They would like to see a much more authoritarian, centralized, openly theocratic version of America. And they are openly working towards those ends, and they're huge supporters in the current U.S. administration. So I think that it goes without saying that, Matt, neither of us are aligned with these people ideologically, is putting it fucking mildly.
I'm not on their mailing list.
We are not on their mailing list. Nothing about these people or their goals is anything that I can get behind or agree with in any way. I am a classical liberal who believes in the importance of democratic institutions, properly functioning democratic institutions that do their job.
What a luxury that is becoming.
What a luxury that would be. I am not a Christian nationalist. Okay, I do not welcome the wimple and the red cloak. I'm a big believer in women fully participating in society with equal rights with men. Okay, so
same.
Let's just
for the record, same.
Just for the record, in case this needs pointing out. Okay, I think that they're the baddies. I think these are the black hats. I think that a lot of the people who were called sort of deranged or delusional for pointing out the very aims that are on Project 2025's own explicit websites were wrong. Okay. These people are organized. They understand what they're doing. They're clear about what their goals are, and I think we should take them seriously. That said, I think there's a pretty big fundamental difference between inviting one of these guys to your cabinet so that your cabinet can have
which Carney did. Just for clarity, that is why we're talking about this guy.
That's right. Which Carney did, so that your key decision makers in the Canadian government can have some real insight into one of the intellectual strains of thought that is currently dominating your largest trading partner's sort of ideological and political agenda. Okay? That is different from saying, gee, let's just invite this Christian nationalist dude up for funsies because we want to actually implement his policies, or we're trying to normalize him, or we're trying to give him a platform, or we're trying to give him credibility. These are very different goals and aims. And I still think there are some people on Blue Sky right now who are living in 2020 in their own minds, where they still seem to think that even talking to problematic people is tantamount to agreeing with them, parroting their goals, furthering their aims. And I think that is tragically misguided. It's wrong. I mean, before we were talking about on the podcast, Matt, you just said, like, what would it have been like if Goring or Goebbels had been invited to speak to Churchill's cabinet during the war?
And they'd agreed.
And had agreed.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm sitting here going, like, no
if
word
I'm
of a fucking lie.
And Goring is willing to come to lunch in 1940 to talk about what the Fuhrer is planning, I'm putting on a nice spread and inviting him to lunch.
That's not because we're pro-Nazi. That's because
I want to hear what they're saying.
I want to understand what they're saying and thinking directly. You can have lunch with your enemy. And in fact, if you have the opportunity to, you should. So, like,
you said a minute ago, you were rolling through a couple of verbs about endorsing or embracing, and I think that the verb you missed was platforming, because that's the word I keep seeing come up. Well, if you invite this person, you've given him a platform.
No, you haven't.
You know what? This is. I'm actually a little nuanced on this.
Okay,
I agree. There can be concerns editorially about people like you and I who have an existing platform.
Sure.
We have to be choosy about the people we make a conscious effort to bring into our space, because then they might get access to an audience via us they've never had before. That's a legitimate concern.
But that's not platforming. That's like literally just editorial judgment is what we used to call that.
But it's also not what Carney is doing. The cabinet meeting is not public. It's not being broadcast. This was an opportunity for decision makers in the Canadian government to hear directly from the source what one of the competing, fluctuating mega factions believes. And this guy was willing to come up here and talk to us about what his faction believes. And people were angry about this. I do not endorse what this guy stands for. We should have taken the opportunity to listen to it. Remember I told you a few months ago about Hoekstra, the U.S. ambassador to Canada? Yes. I went to one of his speeches and didn't agree
you
with...
platformed him, Matt?
Apparently. Didn't agree with much of what he had to say, but I benefited from hearing it. And I also told you after it was useful to hear a blunt description of how one of the mega factions views geopolitics, the United States, and U.S.-Canadian relations. I didn't have to agree with it to benefit from it. Oh, okay. Here is a guy bluntly and plainly articulating a worldview. Don't have to embrace it, but I should understand it.
Well, the other thing I would just say is I think the whole concept of platforming, which again sort of was the peak woke era stuff, that whole concept was always pretty intellectually bankrupt, is kind of what I would go to. Is like, look, I agree with you. Yes, there is a concept called editorial judgment, right? Where people who run platforms assume some responsibility among themselves for what ideas they're willing to engage with and what ideas for them are beyond the pale. One of the editorial judgment, like for example, we at The Line Alberta recently had Rob Breckenridge do a podcast with a separatist. Yep. So, okay, we're willing to engage with some of these ideas, or he was willing to engage with a thoughtful separatist on some of the ideas that the separatists are putting forward.
And it was an informative, good faith, useful discussion that left me better off for having listened to it.
I think that is an exercise in editorial judgment. I've been pretty strongly, openly against separatism as a viable option for Alberta.
Yep.
But I'm willing to sort of extend editorial judgment to the idea that like we can discuss these ideas. Okay. I am not willing to extend editorial judgment to like the neo-Nazis, like, you know what I mean? Like
the Holocaust deniers.
Yeah, Holocaust deniers. Yep. Like my editorial judgment does not extend that far. That's not about platforming or not platforming. That's about me saying like within the extent of my own reach, I'm willing to exercise my own moral judgment in terms of what kinds of ideas I'm willing to play with or entertain. It also means, and I think that's the role of any kind of leadership position. I would also say like there's stuff that we don't entertain because not because it's good or bad, but just because it's outside the purview of what we do here. Like, there's lots of stuff we're not going to talk about at the line just because we don't talk a lot about, for example, just American politics because we're a Canadian podcast company. We'll talk about American politics as it pertains to Canada, and sometimes I think it's relevant for us to get into it, but we're not an American political firm, right? So like our editorial judgment is more than just moral, it's also practical, right? But when you get into this idea of platforming, I think this totally misunderstands what it is that we do here and what our responsibilities are. Our responsibilities, because when you use phrases like platforming, basically you're operating under the assumption that, okay, now I personally am the gatekeeper and it's my job to keep the bad ideas off the air or to put the good ideas on the air. I don't think that's the correct way of understanding our role, frankly. It's not my job to censor bad ideas. Yeah. That's not actually the job. It's my job to present good discretion and judgment to make sure that my audience is well served with a smorgasbord of viewpoints, which I may or may not agree with. Okay, like that's a different job. It's not my job to crack down on the bads and make sure that they are forever cast to Siberia with no toehold in respectable society. That's a different kind of much more sensorial approach. And that kind of sensorial approach is baked into the very idea of the concept of the word platforming. Secondly, the reason why I think the idea of platforming is so intellectually bankrupt is that, as we've seen, its meaning has been radically expanded. It now no longer means not putting neo-Nazis on your platform. It then expanded to the idea of not putting anyone who is even remotely problematic to a fairly narrow ideological band of people on Twitter on your platform. And now it's being expanded to you can't even talk to people who are too problematic. So the idea of platform, there's no platform here. The idea of platforming has been expanded well beyond any kind of defensible usage or terminology. So anyway, that's my rant. That's all I have to say about this. But look, unfortunately, the Carney caved to the blue sky.
I don't know exactly what happened. So So Kevin Roberts, this American dude, was scheduled to speak at the Don't Call It a Retreat cabinet retreat that's happening in Toronto this weekend. He was going to be on a panel with former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd talking about trade and geopolitics. The event became controversial, and the government has basically said that Mr. Roberts, unfortunately, is no longer able to attend. I don't know if they canceled. I don't know if he said, fuck you guys, I'm not going to show up. Who knows? In any case, it doesn't look good.
It doesn't look good. And for all we know, it was the usual suspects within the Liberal caucus who've been probably chomping at the bit at Carney's move toward more conservative policy generally, and has just said, this is the last straw. I will not huff and puff out and blew out steam to go do this. So like, I don't know the scenario by which this guy's invitation got lost in the mail or if he just chose not to come. But I would say, look, if you guys, if they are falling victim to blue sky-itis, it is no longer 2020, guys. You don't have to pay attention to what people are saying on social media anymore. And you don't have to be using the latest outrage on social media to be guiding your own internal decisions about who you talk to and who you don't, and who you quote unquote platform and who you don't. The hold that whole brigade had on the culture is now as dead as you allow it to be. So be free, my pretties. Go fly, exercise your good judgment on your own goddamn moral cognizance, and stop paying attention to any of this drama. That's all I have to say about the matter. Endorsed. Moving on. And on that note, I've got to go. The kids are back in school, and I've got to go grab mine.
Pick up the kids. Mine are old enough now they can walk home. Everybody, thanks. It's funny. I've been promising everybody now that Labor Day's passes, we'll be back at full speed. And then the article we plan to run today got nuked by Carney's announcements. So stay tuned. We're rewriting that. It's going to run early next week, but we are back in business. Check us out, readtheline.ca. Like and subscribe to us there. Sign up for a free account. Get access to almost everything we do. Whatever platform you've listened to this on, YouTube, Twitter, Apple, Spotify, make sure you followed us there. Leave us a nice review. Give us a thumbs up. Have an amazing weekend. Stay tuned for a dispatch. www.readtheline.ca. Like and subscribe.